The day everything changed did not begin with shouting, or breaking, or some dramatic storm. It began with the quiet routine of a woman who had spent her entire life serving others, convincing herself that love meant endurance. I woke up early that morning, long before anyone else in the house, as I always did. Old habits cling to the bones, even when the people around you forget the hands that taught them how to live. The kitchen was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your chest and reminds you that this is not your home, not truly. I moved slowly, my joints stiff but my heart even stiffer. I thought I would make tea, perhaps warm my fingers on the cup before the day's invisible work began. But before the kettle could whistle, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway, my son-in-law's footsteps. His voice soon followed, a harsh, impatient tone scraping against the walls as if the house itself winced at his presence. He entered the kitchen with that familiar look of irritation, like my existence alone was a burden he had been forced to carry. He didn't greet me. He never did. Instead, he tossed his bag on the table and opened the fridge with a loud, exaggerated sigh. I watched him from the corner of my eye, trying to make myself small, invisible, harmless. It didn't matter. His anger always found me. When he slammed the fridge door, I felt the old familiar tension curl inside my chest, an instinctive fear that grew sharper with each passing day. "You eat," he snapped suddenly, not looking at me. "But you don't help." The words were thrown like stones, casual yet meant to bruise. I froze. My hands trembled slightly around the teacup, but I said nothing. Silence had become my shield. Silence kept the peace, or at least an illusion of it. But he wasn't done. He moved closer, each step heavy with resentment, until his shadow fell across me like a cold cloud blocking whatever little warmth I had left. Before I could take a breath, his hand jerked, and the mug in his grip tilted. Hot coffee splashed across my arm, my dress, the floor. The burning sensation immediate, a sharp sting that shot up my skin. I gasped, more from shock than pain. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge what he had done. Instead, he muttered under his breath, "Dead weight." The words dripped heavier than the coffee dripping from my dress. For a moment, everything inside me stopped. My heartbeat, my voice, my sense of place. All of it froze in a silent, suffocating ache. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something I had tried so hard to deny. I no longer belonged here. Not in this kitchen. Not in this house. Not in the life of a daughter who had forgotten the meaning of the word mother. My daughter entered the kitchen a few seconds later, rubbing her eyes, confused by the mess. She saw the spilled coffee, saw the droplets still sliding down my arm, saw the look on her husband's face, but she didn't ask what happened. She didn't take my hand or ask if I was hurt. She simply sighed, as if I were the cause of yet another inconvenience, and began wiping the counter. That silence hurt more than the burn. That silence told me everything. The girl I carried, fed, loved, protected was gone. In her place stood a woman shaped by someone else's influence, someone else's priorities, someone else's voice. A woman who chose peace with her husband over dignity for her mother. I walked out of the kitchen quietly, each step heavier than the last, my wet dress clinging to my skin. The hallway felt colder than usual, as though the house itself rejected my presence. I reached my room, if it could even be called a room. A small space at the back of the house, barely large enough for my bed and a suitcase I had never fully unpacked. Maybe I always knew I would need it again. Maybe mothers always know when their stay is temporary. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence pressing against my ears until the faintest sound seemed loud. My own breath, shaky and uneven. I glanced at my reflection in the small mirror on the wall. The woman staring back looked older than her years, her eyes tired, her shoulders sagging beneath the weight of unspoken pain. She looked like someone who had given too much for too long. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a soft, heartbreaking way that only someone who has been wounded repeatedly can understand. I had survived a lot in life. Poverty, sacrifice, widowhood, loneliness. But betrayal from your own blood, that is a wound nothing prepares you for. As I sat there, the pain in my arm throbbing in steady waves, I felt a question rise inside me. A question I had been avoiding for months. Is this how the rest of my life will be? Unwanted? Invisible? Shamed for existing? The thought hollowed me out from the inside. My heart, which had endured so much, suddenly felt fragile, as if one more crack would break it entirely. And then, as quietly as a whisper, another thought formed, one I had not allowed myself to think in years. What if I left? What if I walked away before I completely disappeared in this house? Before they erased every trace of who I was? That question terrified me. Yet it also breathed a strange kind of strength into my chest. A strength I had forgotten I still possessed. A strength that maybe, just maybe, would save me. The rest of the morning passed in a blur, each minute stretching painfully long as I tried to steady my breathing and gather the pieces of myself scattered by my son-in-law's cruelty. I stayed inside my small room, gently dabbing the burn on my arm with a cool cloth, feeling the sting not only on my skin but deep inside my heart. Outside my door, life in the house moved on without hesitation, without a pause, without a single thought of checking on me. I heard my daughter laughing faintly in the living room, a sound that once brought warmth to my soul but now pierced through me with a quiet grief. How strange, how painful, that the voice of someone you once raised with your whole being could one day become the sound that confirms your isolation. Every chuckle, every soft conversation drifting through the hallway reminded me that I was no longer part of their world. I was merely a shadow lingering in a home where no one needed my presence. As the minutes turned into hours, I found myself replaying my life over and over again in my mind. I remembered the nights when I stayed awake beside my daughter's cradle, singing softly to her so she wouldn't cry. I remembered the mornings when I walked miles to get groceries because we couldn't afford bus fare. I remembered working 2 jobs just to save enough money to send her to school with dignity. I remembered her teenage years, how she slammed doors, yelled, cried, apologized, hugged me, and sometimes refused to speak for days. I survived all of it. But what hurt the most was knowing that after all those years, after all the sacrifices, she could stand silently beside a man who treated me like dirt. She had watched him throw coffee at me, watched the liquid burn my skin, and she didn't rush forward. She didn't shout at him. She didn't even ask if I was okay. She simply let it happen as if I deserved it. As if my pain was an inconvenience in her marriage. I sat silently, staring at the window of my tiny room, watching the pale sunlight fade into a cloudy afternoon. The air felt heavier, as though the house itself carried the weight of unspoken truths. I knew that if I stayed silent, if I bowed my head just a little lower, this would become my normal. The insults, the blame, the indifference, the slow erasure of my identity. I had seen other women crumble under the pressure of ungrateful family members. I had watched neighbors and friends grow smaller, quieter, until they were nothing more than burdens in the eyes of the very people who should have held them with love. I used to think I would never end up like that. I was strong. I had endured life storms before. But somehow this storm felt different. Not loud and destructive but quiet and suffocating, like a slow drowning. Just then a soft knock came on my door. I stiffened, unsure of whether to answer. When the door cracked open, it wasn't my daughter. It was my little granddaughter, 7 years old, with wide innocent eyes that had not yet learned cruelty. "Grandma, are you okay?" she whispered, clutching her stuffed rabbit. That small, simple question, so full of genuine concern, unraveled something inside me. I felt tears burn behind my eyes. I forced a smile and nodded, but she wasn't fooled. Children always sense the truth adults try to hide. She climbed onto the bed beside me, her tiny hands reaching for my injured arm. When she saw the faint redness where the coffee had hit, she frowned. "Did Mommy's husband do that?" she asked innocently. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't want to poison her mind, but I couldn't lie either. Before I could speak, she gently placed her hand on my cheek and whispered, "I love you, Grandma." Those 4 words, spoken so softly, carried more comfort than anything I had felt in months. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel loved, truly loved. But children eventually return to play, and innocence cannot shield a woman from reality. When she left the room, the silence returned heavier than before. I looked around the cramped space, at the single suitcase resting underneath the bed, The same suitcase I had brought years ago when my daughter insisted I move in with them because, "You shouldn't be alone, Mom." Oh, the irony. I had moved in hoping for companionship, for warmth, for family. Instead, I found myself living like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. The suitcase that once symbolized hope now felt like a reminder. I was never meant to stay. I reached under the bed, pulled it out, and placed it on the mattress. My hands hovered over the zipper, trembling, not from fear but from realization. It was time. Time to choose myself. Time to stop letting the world walk over me. Time to leave before the house swallowed the last pieces of my spirit. I unzipped the suitcase slowly, the sound slicing through the silence like a firm decision. I folded my clothes one by one, not out of haste, but with a quiet dignity that comes from reclaiming one's life. Each garment held memories. Laughter from old days, warmth from nights spent caring for my family, comfort during my struggles. As I packed, tears dropped onto the fabric, not tears of weakness but tears of release. Tears for everything I had given. Tears for everything I had lost. Tears for the mother I once was, and the woman I was becoming again. When the last item was placed inside, I closed the suitcase and sat beside it, breathing deeply. A strange calm washed over me. Not peace, not yet, but strength, a strength I had forgotten I still possessed. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life, over my choices, over my destiny. And in that fragile, powerful moment, I whispered to myself words I had not dared to say out loud in a long time. I deserve better. I deserve respect. And I will not die in a house where my existence is treated like a burden. I didn't know what waited for me outside those walls, but I knew what waited for me if I stayed. And I refused to let that be the end of my story. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the house settled into an unsettling quiet, I sat with my packed suitcase beside me, waiting for the right moment to step out. But nothing in life prepares you for the moment you decide to walk away from your own child's home. My hands rested on the handle of the suitcase, gently squeezing and releasing it as waves of doubt rushed through me. Where would I go? How would I live? Who would I become outside these walls? For years, I told myself staying was the only option, that enduring humiliation was better than being alone. But loneliness had already found me in this house. Loneliness sat with me at the dinner table, slept beside me in my tiny room, followed me like a shadow that grew darker every day. Leaving wouldn't create loneliness. Leaving simply meant refusing to live inside a place where I had already become invisible. As the house grew quieter, I heard the muffled clatter of spoons in the kitchen. Dinner time. They never called me for meals anymore. If I appeared, I ate silently at the corner of the table. If I didn't, no one noticed my absence. Tonight I stayed in my room and listened. The sound of plates, chairs being pulled, a brief argument between my daughter and her husband. These were the familiar rhythms of a life I no longer belonged to. And then his voice rose sharply, the voice that had become a constant reminder of my diminishing worth. "Why is your mother even here?" he snapped. "She eats. She costs. But she does nothing." His words sliced through me with painful clarity, each syllable another confirmation of the truth I had denied for too long. My breath caught in my throat. Even after everything, a small irrational part of me still hoped my daughter would defend me, that she would say something, anything, to counter his cruelty. But all I heard was silence. A long, suffocating silence that stretched until he muttered something else under his breath, and the conversation shifted away. Silence. Always silence. Silence from a daughter whose voice I once nourished with lullabies. Silence from a woman I carried into this world with my own pain. Silence that screamed louder than any insult ever could. That silence told me I was no longer just unwelcome. I was unwanted. My heart ached as I stood up slowly, gripping the old suitcase as if it were the last solid thing in my life. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and opened the door. The hallway felt colder tonight, the shadows longer, as though the house itself sensed my departure. As I stepped toward the front door, the floorboards creaked softly, announcing each step in a house where my footsteps usually meant nothing. I paused near the living room, hearing the TV playing, my granddaughter's laughter blending with the cartoon voices. Her innocence tugged at my heart. Leaving her felt like leaving behind the last warm part of this house. But staying for her meant enduring everything else. I took a small step back and peeked inside. She sat cross-legged on the carpet, the glow of the TV reflecting in her bright eyes. She didn't see me, not yet. And maybe that was better. If she saw me leave, she would run to me, hold my hand, ask questions I didn't have the strength to answer. My throat tightened painfully at the thought of her face when she discovered I was gone. I whispered a silent goodbye, letting my eyes linger on her for a moment longer. One day I hoped she will understand why I had to leave. I turned toward the front door again, gripping the handle of my suitcase with trembling fingers. As I reached for the doorknob, I froze. Not because I was scared to leave, but because a soft voice suddenly spoke behind me. "Mom, where are you going?" My daughter's voice. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed loosely, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Not angry, not sad, not even curious, just tired. Tired of me. Tired of the situation, tired of life. And in that moment I realized that she wasn't the girl I raised anymore. Life, marriage, stress, pressure. Everything had shaped her into someone distant, someone hardened, someone who had forgotten what love looks like when it comes from a mother. I inhaled slowly and replied with a calmness that surprised me. "I'm leaving." My voice didn't shake, though my heart felt like it was cracking in my chest. She exhaled sharply, almost a scoff. "Mom, don't start drama." The word drama hit me like a slap. If only she knew how many nights I had cried quietly into my pillow just to avoid causing her stress. If only she knew how many times I swallowed tears because I didn't want to trouble her. But no matter how much I wanted to explain, no words came out. There was no point. She wasn't ready to hear. She wasn't ready to understand. And I wasn't willing to beg for a place in her life anymore. My son-in-law appeared behind her. Annoyance etched across his face. "If she wants to leave, let her. She'll be back in 2 days when she realizes she can't survive on her own." He chuckled coldly. My daughter didn't correct him, didn't defend me, didn't say a word. Just stood there. That was the moment everything inside me hardened. Not in bitterness but in strength. A quiet, powerful strength. I straightened my shoulders, met his eyes and said softly, "I survived before you ever came into my life. I will survive after I leave this house." His smirk faltered slightly, surprised by the firmness in my voice. Without waiting for another word, I opened the door. Cold air washed over me, sharp and refreshing, as if the world outside had been waiting for me to finally reclaim my freedom. I stepped out, pulling the suitcase behind me. The door shut quietly. Not slammed, not in anger but in finality. As I walked down the empty street that night, the moon casting pale light on the road, I felt a strange mix of fear and liberation swirling inside me. Fear of the unknown future, but liberation from the pain I had been drowning in for so long. For the first time in years I felt like a person. A woman. A mother who still mattered, to herself if no one else. And somewhere deep inside a whisper echoed. Leaving is not the end. Leaving is the beginning of finding yourself again. The cold night air wrapped around me as I walked down the silent street, pulling my thin shawl tighter around my shoulders. The weight of the suitcase dragged slightly behind me, its wheels scraping against the uneven pavement with a tired rhythm, almost like a heartbeat struggling to keep going. Every step away from the house felt like peeling off layers of pain that had clung to me for years. But even as distance grew between me and that place, the heaviness in my chest didn't disappear. In fact, it grew sharper, sharper than the cold wind hitting my face. I wasn't just walking away from a house. I was walking away from a lifetime of memories. Some beautiful, some painful, all tied to the same love I had once believed would protect me forever. Streetlights flickered above me, casting long shadows on the ground. I had nowhere specific to go. No plan. No destination. Just the quiet determination that I would no longer allow myself to be humiliated. At my age, people expect you to settle, to accept, to endure. But they forget that a mother's heart doesn't lose its strength just because years have passed. I had endured too much already. Tonight, for the first time in decades, I was choosing myself. As I walked, my thoughts drifted to my younger days, to the time when I first became a mother. I remembered holding my daughter for the first time, the tiny fingers curling around mine, her eyes searching for something she didn't yet understand but instinctively trusted. I remembered the nights I walked back and forth in our small kitchen, rocking her gently in my arms while humming lullabies my own mother had taught me. Those nights were long, exhausting, and beautiful. Every sacrifice felt like a gift. Every hardship felt worth it. I never imagined that the same child whose head once rested on my chest would one day be the reason my chest felt so painfully hollow. Tears stung my eyes as I continued walking, though I brushed them away quickly. Crying wouldn't help me now. I needed strength, more strength than I had ever needed in my life. The road was nearly empty. A few cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping across the pavement. I felt exposed and small under their cold beams. But I kept moving. Stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant feeling. And feeling hurt too much. After nearly half an hour of walking, my legs began to tremble. I found a bus stop bench and carefully lowered myself onto it, letting out a slow, shaky breath. The bench was cold, the metal biting through my clothes. I placed the suitcase beside me and leaned back, staring at the dark sky overhead. Clouds drifted across the moon, casting shifting shadows that seemed to mirror the uncertainty swirling inside me. My hands trembled slightly as I rubbed them together for warmth, but it wasn't enough. I was exhausted, not just from the walk, but from years of emotional battles I had silently fought alone. As I sat there, a faint memory surfaced, one from my childhood. I remembered my mother's voice telling me, "A woman must be strong, not because the world is kind, but because it often isn't." At the time, I didn't fully understand her words. But now, sitting alone under the night sky with my life packed into a single suitcase, I finally understood what she meant. Strength isn't always shouting or fighting. Sometimes, strength is simply choosing to walk away from a place that is killing you slowly. A bus pulled up shortly after, its doors hissing open. The driver, an older man with gentle eyes, looked at me for a moment. "You getting on, ma'am?" he asked. I hesitated. "Where does this bus go?" I whispered. He named a few stops, none familiar, none comforting. But what did it matter? Anywhere was better than the place I had left. I nodded and stepped onto the bus, finding a seat near the window. The warmth inside wrapped around me instantly, and for a brief moment, I felt my body relax. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I watched the streets pass by, the shops, the empty sidewalks, the quiet houses glowing faintly from within. People lived inside them, families gathered, laughter echoed, lives continued. And there I was, a mother with no home to return to. A mother whose love had been overshadowed by someone else's influence. A mother who had given up everything for a child who could no longer see her worth. The realization cut so deeply that I pressed my hand against my chest, as though trying to hold my heart together. The bus hummed softly as it traveled through the sleeping town. A few passengers sat scattered across the seats. An elderly man dozing off, a young woman scrolling through her phone, a teenage boy with headphones lost in his own world. No one looked at me. No one noticed the woman silently falling apart behind the reflection in the window. In that moment, I felt both invisible and strangely free. Invisible to the world. Free from the accusations, the harsh words, the daily humiliations. Freedom tasted bittersweet. I didn't know where to get off. But as the bus approached a stop near the town's small community shelter, something inside me stirred. A faint memory, someone telling me years ago that the shelter helped older women in difficult situations. I didn't know if they would take me. I didn't know if I could stay. But I knew that I couldn't keep riding that bus forever, running from pain that lived in my bones. When the bus slowed, I stood up, gripping the suitcase tightly. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "This your stop?" he asked. I wasn't sure, but I nodded anyway. The doors opened with a soft sigh, and the cool air rushed in again. I stepped out slowly, my feet touching unfamiliar ground. The bus pulled away, leaving me standing alone on the dimly lit sidewalk, the shelter's entrance glowing faintly like a distant promise. I inhaled deeply, then took a step forward. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward something, toward dignity. toward peace, toward myself. The shelter's entrance felt strangely intimidating as I approached it, my suitcase rolling quietly behind me. A soft yellow light glowed above the door, flickering slightly, like a tired guardian trying its best to stay awake. The building wasn't grand or welcoming in the traditional sense. Its bricks were old, its windows slightly fogged, its steps worn down by the countless feet that had climbed them seeking hope, refuge, or simply a place to breathe without fear. As I reached the door, I paused, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. I had stepped through thousands of doors in my life, homes, offices, hospitals, even my daughter's house, but this door felt different. This door wasn't just an entrance. It was the line between who I had been and who I could still become. I took a slow breath and pushed it open. The warmth inside wrapped around me instantly, a comforting contrast to the cold night air outside. A soft buzz of voices hummed in the background, mixed with the faint aroma of soup simmering somewhere deeper inside the building. A woman at the reception desk looked up, her eyes kind in a way I hadn't seen in years. She didn't look annoyed. She didn't look impatient. She didn't look at me the way my son-in-law had, as if I were something he wished didn't exist. No, her gaze held understanding, compassion, and a recognition of pain she had probably seen too many times before. "Good evening," she said gently, her voice warm like a blanket being placed around shivering shoulders. "How can we help you tonight?" The question hit me harder than any insult ever had. Help. It had been so long since someone had offered me help without expecting something in return. My throat tightened as I struggled to find the right words. I wanted to explain everything, how my son-in-law treated me, how my daughter had changed, how loneliness had become my silent companion. But the words tangled together, too heavy to speak out loud. I need a place to stay," I whispered, my voice trembling like a candle in the wind. She didn't ask for details. She didn't interrogate me. She simply nodded and offered a soft smile. "Of course. You're safe here." Safe. The word sank into my chest, warming a place inside me that had grown cold long ago. She led me down a hallway lined with doors. The floors creaked softly, and the walls were decorated with simple drawings. Children's scribbles of houses, hearts, sunshine, and people holding hands. Hope drawn by small fingers. At the end of the hall, she opened a room with a small bed, a wooden dresser, and a window overlooking a dimly lit garden. The room was modest, but it felt more like home than the place I had just left behind. "You can stay here for as long as you need," she said before leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat on the bed slowly, running my fingers over the blanket. It wasn't fancy or luxurious, but it was warm. And right now, warmth felt like a blessing. I set my suitcase on the floor and opened it. My clothes still carried the faint smell of the house I had escaped from, triggering memories that tugged at my heart. The burn on my arm throbbed lightly, reminding me why I was here. A tear slipped down my cheek, followed by another and then another. Soon I was crying quietly, not in anger or desperation, but in release. Years of unspoken hurt spilled out of me like a dam finally breaking. I cried for the mother I had been. I cried for the daughter I had lost. I cried for the woman I was trying to become. Eventually, the tears slowed, leaving me exhausted but strangely lighter. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was silent except for the distant murmur of voices in the hallway. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt peaceful. My eyes began to close, but just before sleep pulled me under, I heard a soft knock on the door. A middle-aged woman peeked inside. She had gentle eyes and a warm smile. "New here?" she asked softly. I nodded. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "My name is Marlene," she said. "I've been here for a while." Her voice was calm, steady, a woman who had survived storms of her own. She sat on the edge of the chair by the dresser and looked at me kindly. "You don't have to tell me your story," she said. "But if you ever want to, I'll listen." Her presence felt comforting, like the company of someone who understood pain without requiring details. I didn't speak much, but she shared her story gently. How her children had drifted away after she lost her job. How she ended up here with no one left to turn to. Her words wrapped around me like threads of connection, stitching the first pieces of healing into my heart. We were strangers, yet connected by wounds only mothers could understand. After she left, I closed my eyes again. This time when sleep came, it wasn't restless. It wasn't filled with fear or memories that clawed at me. For the first time in a very long while, sleep felt like a friend, quiet, gentle and healing. When morning light crept through the window, I woke up slowly, surprised by how rested I felt. I sat up, stretched a little and looked around the room. The sunlight painted the walls in soft gold, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. The world hadn't ended. I hadn't fallen apart. I had survived the night, and something deep inside me whispered that I might survive the days to come too. I wasn't sure what my future held. I didn't know whether my daughter would look for me, whether she would regret what had happened, or whether she would simply move on. But for the first time in years, I realized something. My life did not end in that house. My worth was not defined by their cruelty, and my journey had only just begun. The days that followed passed slowly, quietly, like soft ripples spreading across a still lake. Every morning at the shelter began with the gentle hum of women waking up, some stretching stiff joints, some whispering prayers, some simply staring out of the small windows as if trying to remember who they used to be before life pushed them here. But there was something comforting in that shared stillness. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't the only one carrying the weight of betrayal. I wasn't the only mother whose love had been taken for granted. I wasn't the only woman forced to begin again at an age when society expects you to fade quietly. Here among strangers, I found a strange, unexpected sense of belonging. Marlene visited me every morning. She would knock softly before entering, carrying 2 cups of tea, one for herself, one for me. She had a way of sitting that made the small chair in my room seem like a throne. She told stories from her childhood, from her marriage, from her losses, and each story stitched another thread of connection between us. I found myself talking too, little by little. Not everything, not all the pain, but pieces of it. Enough for her to understand the shape of the wound inside me. She listened without judgment, without interruption, without offering the kind of false comfort people give when they can't handle the truth. She simply listened. And sometimes listening is the purest act of love. One afternoon, I went to the dining area to help serve lunch. The volunteers were always short-handed, and even though no one expected anything from me, I felt a pull to contribute. After years of being accused of doing nothing, offering my hands freely felt strangely empowering. As I scooped warm soup into bowls, a younger woman approached me. She looked barely in her 30s, but her eyes held a lifetime of exhaustion. "You remind me of my mom," she said quietly. I smiled softly. "Is your mother here too?" She shook her head. "She passed away." A shadow crossed her face. I wish I had treated her better. Her voice trembled and cracked, and before I knew it, she broke down crying. I set the ladle aside and wrapped my arm around her shoulders, holding her as she sobbed against me. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Something warm, something affirming. Even after everything I had lost, I still had the ability to comfort, to heal, to matter. That night, I lay in my small bed, staring at the ceiling. The burn on my arm was healing, the redness fading slowly, but the emotional scars still throbbed quietly beneath the surface. I found myself thinking about my daughter again. Where was she right now? Did she even notice I was gone? Did she sleep peacefully that night? Or did something feel missing? I imagined her walking around the house, seeing the empty corner where I used to sit, noticing the silence where my presence once filled space. But another thought crept in. The possibility that she hadn't noticed at all. That life had moved on without even a ripple. The thought made my chest ache, but I forced myself to breathe through it. Healing didn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. Healing meant accepting the pain was real, and still choosing to move forward. In the days that followed, I slowly became part of the shelter's rhythm. I helped fold laundry, assisted in the small kitchen, sat with new arrivals who cried silently on their first night. Women with stories etched deeply into their tired faces. Some were young mothers abandoned by husbands. Some were older women cast aside by their children. Some had no family left at all. Our stories were different, but our wounds were familiar. And in sharing that pain, we found comfort no one else in the world could offer. But healing is never a straight path. One evening, as I was folding blankets, I overheard two volunteers talking near the hallway. "There's a woman here," one of them whispered. "An older lady who left home because her daughter doesn't want her." She didn't know she was talking about me. Still, those words cut through me like a cold blade. I paused mid-fold, my hands trembling. Hearing my life reduced to one sentence. A sentence dripping with pity rattled me. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, letting the sting pass. I wasn't just a woman who had been unwanted. I was a woman who had survived, who had walked away, who had chosen dignity. They knew only the ending, not the story. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I tossed softly beneath the thin blanket, my mind a storm of memories. My daughter's smile from years ago, her laughter when she was little, the way she clung to my sari as a child, her tiny hands reaching for me. How could that same child remain silent while her husband burned me with coffee? How could she let me pack my suitcase without stopping me? How could she watch me walk out the door without breaking apart? I felt tears slide down the sides of my face, soaking into the pillow. The pain was sharp, fresh, almost unbearable. But just as despair threatened to swallow me whole, I remembered something: my granddaughter. Her innocent face, her gentle voice, the way she whispered, "I love you, Grandma." That small moment of love had carried me through darkness. And suddenly something inside me shifted. Not the pain, but my relationship to it. Perhaps my daughter had changed. Perhaps life had hardened her heart. But my granddaughter, she still carried love. She still saw me. And maybe one day when she grew older, she would remember me. Not as a burden, but as the woman who loved her when no one else was paying attention. The next morning, I stepped outside into the small garden behind the shelter. The air was crisp, the flowers just beginning to bloom. I sat on a wooden bench, closing my eyes as the sunlight warmed my face. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future. Not defined by pain, not limited by age, not shaped by the cruelty of others. Maybe I could learn something new. Maybe I could volunteer here permanently. Maybe I could form friendships that didn't depend on duty or obligation. A life beyond survival. A life worth living. As I sat there, breathing deeply, I whispered softly to myself, "I may have been thrown away, but I am not done." Little did I know, destiny had one more twist waiting for me. A twist that would shake the very ground I stood on, and bring me face to face with the past I thought I had left behind. The twist arrived on a morning that felt deceptively ordinary. I was helping in the shelter's laundry room, folding sheets that smelled faintly of detergent and warm air. The machines hummed rhythmically, almost soothing, their sound blending into the quiet routine I had slowly grown comfortable with. My movements had become steadier, my breaths easier. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of the hours ahead. I wasn't waiting for insults. I wasn't bracing myself for someone's anger. I was simply existing, peacefully, and that in itself felt unfamiliar. Then the door opened. "Ma'am?" A staff member called from the hallway, her expression strangely hesitant. "Someone's here asking for you." My heart stilled. The sheet slipped from my hands and fell to the floor. In that single moment, the world seemed to tilt, just slightly but enough for my breath to catch. Someone was here for me. But who? My mind spun through possibilities, none comforting. Fear pricked at my skin like cold needles. Was it my daughter? My son-in-law? Had something happened to my granddaughter? Had they come to drag me back, not out of love but out of guilt or appearances? I followed the staff member slowly, each step heavy with uncertainty. The hallway felt longer than usual, the walls closing in around me. My palms grew damp. When we reached the small waiting area near the entrance, she gestured toward a chair. Sitting there was my daughter. My breath left my body all at once, as if someone had punched the air out of my lungs. She looked different. Not physically, she was the same woman I had left behind. But something about her eyes, they were swollen, red, tired. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone. And when she looked up at me, something inside her gaze cracked. Something I hadn't seen in years. "Mom," she whispered. her voice breaking in the first syllable. I froze, my feet rooted to the floor. She stood up slowly, as if afraid I would disappear if she moved too fast. We stared at each other for a long, breathless moment. Two women tied by blood, separated by wounds that words could barely explain. When she finally stepped closer, her lips trembled. "Mom, I'm sorry." The words sliced through the air, fragile and trembling, as if they might shatter before reaching me. My throat tightened painfully. I didn't know whether to cry, to turn away, or to brace myself for disappointment. For a moment, all I could do was stare at her. This grown woman who once held my hand while learning to walk, who once cried into my lap after nightmares, who once said I was her whole world. She continued, voice unsteady. "I've been looking for you for days. I didn't know where you went. I thought something terrible happened." Her voice cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. I couldn't breathe thinking about it. I stood motionless as she sobbed openly, trembling like a child again. Something inside me softened, but pain held me still. I had loved her all my life, but love had become my deepest wound. She reached for my hand gently, hesitantly, as if afraid I would pull away. "Mom, I made a terrible mistake," she whispered. "I let him treat you horribly. I stood there. I didn't defend you. I didn't protect you. Her voice broke. I failed you." My own eyes stung with tears, though I blinked them back. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice felt locked behind years of hurt. "He told me you left," she continued, "but he didn't tell me why. He lied to me." She swallowed hard. "When I went to your room and saw the empty bed, I felt something inside me break." She stepped closer. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Please come home." Her voice shook with desperation. "I need you. I didn't realize how much until you were gone." I looked into her eyes, not the eyes of the woman who had been silent in the kitchen, but the eyes of the little girl I once knew, the little girl who clung to my sorry, who cried when I left for work, who believed I could fix anything. When she saw me, her whole face lit up. "Grandma!" she cried, running toward me with open arms. I knelt down instinctively and she crashed into me, wrapping her small arms around my neck. "Why did you go away? I missed you so much." Her warmth melted the last frozen corner inside my heart. She pulled back, her tiny hands cupping my cheeks. "Please come back home," she begged. "Mom cried every day." I looked up at my daughter again. She stood there crying openly, hands trembling, waiting, hoping for forgiveness she wasn't sure she deserved. A deep, aching sigh escaped my chest. I rose slowly, my knees shaking slightly, and placed my hand on her cheek. She closed her eyes instantly, leaning into my touch like a child seeking comfort. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," I whispered. "I left because I needed to love myself." Her tears flowed harder, as if my words had broken something inside her. "I know, Mom. I know. And I'm so sorry you ever felt unloved." Behind her, the shelter staff quietly stepped away, giving us space. My daughter took a deep breath and wiped her face. "I told him to leave," she said softly. "He's gone. I realize I was losing you because of him, and I won't let that happen again." My heart trembled. The air around us felt different now, heavier, softer, fuller. She held my hand tightly. "Mom, please come home. This time, I'll protect you. This time, I'll be the daughter you deserved." Silence hung between us for a moment. Then, for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. A small, fragile smile, filled with pain, healing, and hope. My granddaughter hugged my waist again. My daughter held my hand like she used to. And in that fragile, trembling moment I realized, maybe love can break. Maybe love can fail. But sometimes, love finds its way back. And so, with a slow breath and a steady heart, I whispered the words that mended the air around us. "Let's go home." The ride home felt strangely surreal. My daughter drove slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile peace forming between us. My granddaughter sat beside me in the back seat, her small hand wrapped tightly around mine, as if letting go would mean losing me again. Outside the car window, the world blurred into a blend of moving lights and fading sky, warm, gentle, almost dreamlike. I leaned back, feeling the vibration of the road beneath us, and for the first time in what felt like ages, my chest did not ache with fear. Instead, there was something else there now, something soft, unfamiliar, and cautious: hope. When we reached the house, I hesitated at the front door. The home I had left behind suddenly looked different. Still familiar, still mine, but altered by the days I spent away. My daughter noticed the hesitation and stepped beside me. "Mom," she whispered, "you don't have to go inside if you aren't ready." Her voice was gentle, reassuring, patient in a way I hadn't seen in years. My granddaughter squeezed my arm. "Grandma, I cleaned your room. And I put your favorite blanket on the bed." She beamed proudly, as if she had fixed the whole world with her tiny hands. I took a breath. Slow, deep. Then I stepped inside. Everything was quiet. Almost too quiet. The shadows were still familiar. The walls still held the echo of my past, but something had changed. There was a new softness in the air, like the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for years. My daughter guided me to the living room, where sunlight pooled across the floor. She took a seat across from me and looked at me with the eyes of someone who had finally woken up from a long, painful sleep. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling again, "I want to tell you everything." And she did. Every fear, every regret, every moment she'd ignored the pain in my eyes because she was too tired, too overwhelmed, too tangled in her own world to notice mine. She confessed how her silence had gnawed at her, how guilt had kept her awake every night since I left. She told me she had confronted her husband, and for the first time in their marriage, she didn't stay silent. She told me she realized she had become the very thing she promised as a child she would never be, someone who failed the one person who had never failed her. Hearing her speak was like reopening wounds I thought had healed, only to find them still raw beneath the surface. But her words, they weren't excuses. They were truths, messy, painful, naked truths that carried the weight of years. And they softened something inside me I didn't know could soften again. When she finally finished, she covered her face with her hands and cried silently. My granddaughter leaned her head on my shoulder, sensing the heaviness even if she didn't understand it. I reached out and placed my hand on my daughter's. She looked up, eyes red, lips trembling. "Mom, do you forgive me?" Forgiveness. Such a small word, yet carrying the weight of an entire lifetime. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because forgiveness is not a switch you flip. It's a journey. A slow, winding, uneven journey. And I had only just begun walking it. "I forgive you," I whispered. "But healing will take time." My voice shook, but it didn't break. "And I'm willing to try if you are." She nodded quickly, tears falling again, but this time they were tears of relief. She stood and came to kneel in front of me, resting her head on my lap like she used to when she was little. I stroked her hair gently, feeling the years fall away in pieces. That night, I sat on my freshly made bed, wrapped in the soft blanket my granddaughter had prepared for me. The room felt warm, comforting, and strangely new, like it belonged not to my past, but to the possibility of a different future. My daughter peeked into the room, a hopeful smile on her face. "Mom, I made your favorite tea," she said shyly. The gesture was small, simple, but it carried more love than anything she had said or done in years. We sat together in the living room again, 3 generations, sharing warm tea and quiet laughter. My granddaughter told me stories from school. My daughter listened, every now and then glancing at me with gratitude in her eyes, as if silently thanking me for coming back home. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I stood by the window, looking out at the moon hanging quietly in the sky. The world felt still, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time my heart wasn't burdened by loneliness. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't ignored. I wasn't dead weight. I was needed, loved, wanted. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not always, but truly. Life had broken me in ways I never expected. My own child had hurt me more deeply than any stranger ever could. But life also brought me back to a place I never thought I'd return to. A home that was learning to heal with me. And as I stood there under the moonlight, I whispered to myself, "I am not a burden. I never was. And I never will be again, because coming back wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one. A story where love could grow again. Slowly, gently, beautifully. A story where I finally learned to stand without fear. A story where home didn't mean pain anymore, but peace.